Unfortunately, it's too early to have a glass of wine. Otherwise, I would.
Mimosa? No, just kidding. My team's seen a big week this week.
Okay, awesome. So it is just about 10:10. So hi, everyone, and welcome to Tenbound's second virtual conference this summer. My name is Vivian. I'm the marketing coordinator over at Tenbound, and we're so excited to have you all. And just another quick PSA, we are recording, so just to keep your camera and your mic off if you don't want to be recorded. Also, we are taking questions throughout the session towards the end, so go ahead and don't be shy, drop them in the chat box. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our leadership panel. So first we have Ashley Kelly of Brex, we have Malcolm Smith of HackerOne, Ernest Owasu of Sixth Sense, and Andrea Leiden of Sendoso. So go ahead, guys. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Vivian. Yeah, what a power crew we have here of people that have been doing SDR stuff for years. Placed pretty much all across the country, I believe, which is great. We had all connected a couple weeks ago thinking through, what are some of the things we could talk about on today's panel. And so I think you guys have seen our topic is around keeping your team and yourself motivated during remote times. So I think like the way I was thinking about all of us keeping this conversation going is what does the current state look like? March and April, we had those thoughts of like, okay, we're going to be remote for a little while. It's almost September, which is like totally crazy. And so this is our new world. And so I'm curious to hear from you guys. Maybe Malcolm, we'll start with you. What are you doing with your team today, and how are you keeping them motivated?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks so much. There's a few things I think that are happening now. I think we've accepted the fact that remote life is probably more permanent than we maybe anticipated earlier in the year. So we've taken a lot of steps to address what that means. And I think it took some time to understand what was actually missing from the equation, and what we tried to over-engineer in the beginning. I think the stuff that got really, unfortunately, cut reps to share new ideas and sort of trade wins and battle stories. And I think what that did was heighten a lot of the problems you have in an isolated environment. So some of the steps we've taken since then, we've sort of built out a lot of what I call it like operational redundancy. So we basically try to over communicate now. So I have my reps doing daily stand-ups twice a day. We have what's called our weekly band or segment meeting. So there's a lot of exchange of ideas there. We have quite a few one-on-ones, a lot of informal catch-ups. I let them do what's called a riff session. So every other week they get together, just reps. It's like a players meeting basically. And they just kind of go through some of the concerns they might have, things that they're not maybe comfortable sharing with management. It gets anonymized, filters back up to us. So we've built a lot of that infrastructure in. I think what that's done is it's put us in a place now where we're recapturing a lot of that spirit of being in the office. There's like a lot more camaraderie. And I think the one thing that's really great for me is that a lot of it's been rep driven. So a lot of my reps have taken the helm. They started doing their own like call sessions together, keeping each other accountable, setting up accountability buddies. And I love seeing that because it's so engaging, and like the stickiness of that is massive. Had we directed it ourselves as leaders, it wouldn't have taken as well. And I think we ran into that quite a bit in the beginning of the year when all this started taking place. We started realizing a lot of these fun things we're sort of planning are like mandatory fun. They don't really accomplish what we wanted them to accomplish. It's sort of like going on vacation with your parents, I think is the example I used. So we put a lot of that back into the reps' hands. And some of the stuff that came out of that has been just fantastic. One of my reps specifically, shout out to Dana, she set up what we called an ice cream social, because July was basically, I think, like National Ice Cream Month or something. And it was great. We just had a budget approved to send the reps Grubhub ice cream. The West Coast folks jumped in early and started eating ice cream at 10 a.m., which was awesome to see. We shared stories. People did lightning talks, and it was great. And I think a lot of this levity that we were missing on the onset of the crisis started to return, and I'm really excited to see that. So that's sort of the view from my world. I'd love to hear from other folks. Maybe we'll go to Ernest next.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because, I think a lot of what makes BR successful and thrive is just the pure adaptability. I can confidently say that most of us weren't expecting to have to adapt this much this year. But, through what we've done at Sixth Sense and kind of the teams that led in the past, is our culture is the most. And if you have a really strong culture and you have the resources and the team that kind of buys into that and knows the people in that culture, honestly, a lot that gets thrown at you can be handled. For one thing that we do have is, to point Malcolm, is we don't want to have like inorganic fun. We want to make sure the team is doing things together, things they actually want to do. Otherwise, it's, I love your analogy of vacation with a parent, not going to be ideal. So our team is always about having fun, by all means necessary. Obviously, we're trying to hit our numbers, trying to hit our goals. Trying to find ways to incorporate that into all this going on now is and be challenging at times, but because it's such a huge part of our culture, we're always trying to dig in there. But one thing that I personally started to do with my team, and I think I forget those who did it, but we have this thing where basically if you're on a Zoom call with someone, if for whatever reason their screen freezes or something like that, we'll screenshot it, send it to them, and then say like, we'll ask, obviously, we're not going to force it. But we'll take the screenshot and ask them to put it as their default picture on the back and just put the name we have and see who can snap the. But the whole point behind that is, like, with a lot of these going on right now, we weren't expecting to have to do this, so they kind of have to adapt much to be there. But the thing that we've kind of put our hat on is just like your idea of just culture finds us, culture helps us win, culture helps us fail, whatever it may be. So sticking to that and making sure that's who we are.
And I want to say thank you to Malcolm, because I started utilizing the SDR-led sessions when we were prepping for this meeting. So thank you. I absolutely love that. You know, aside from obviously doing the team stand-ups every single day, something that's been really instrumental for us is the use of Slack. And so what we've been doing is we had a gong in our office, and anytime that an SDR set up a meeting, they would go to the gong and everybody would be clapping, and we really missed that component. And so we actually have that on our Slack channel. They actually put a bell or a gong, and then they say, hey, this is a little bit about how I got this meeting. Here's the title. And then we created 2 additional Slack channels, one for social meeting set, which allows them to show like in-mails that they're having success with that they can actually templatize and then have other SDRs replicate that success, as well as an SDR meeting set. So anytime they have a really good cold call that they can actually put on that channel, that has been super helpful in like creating the culture, creating best practices, and more importantly, scaling what is working today and having so many reps, you know, you'd be able to utilize that and put some numbers on the board. All right, Ashley, bring us home.
Well, I actually love what you just said there as far as like sharing stuff on Slack. We have definitely turned more into, I mean, I guess we did have a choice of moving into more of that culture. As a leader, I've been trying to, and you guys actually do a lot of this like posting on LinkedIn. I'll see what different people say and I'll screenshot and then send it over to my team at all different times of the day. And like, hey, like this is an idea. Like, have we thought about incorporating this? Have we not? And I like to like try and touch in with each person or with the team, like every, like within an hour, right? Like making sure that you're constantly having communications with people. Definitely easier said than done. I think as leaders, we're in meetings all day too, which is really tough. And I never want my people to feel like they can't get a hold of me at all times. And that's one aspect that's totally changed from being in the office, because at least they could like walk right over to me and like ask me a question. I could, you know, show them how to run a report. Like all those things are so tough. But what I'm noticing is like my cell's like sitting right next to me. I'll get a text. Can I call you really quick? Can you walk me through this? Like, let's screen share. And so I think also like talking to your people about what different types of mediums to use to communicate is also something that we've been trying to focus on with my team too. So
yeah, and I just like to piggyback off of that. I completely agree. It was actually kind of funny this morning. Someone team slacked me that I promise you, I've been here for 6 months or whatever it may be. I am not a hologram. And it's just kind of funny because that's the reality of what we face. But the best way, from what I've seen, and similar to what you're doing on 3 of your team, is just making sure that we have some kind of medium where they can just ask away. And those tiny little conversations that we maybe took for granted in the past, someone just like tapping your shoulder or coming to your desk and asking just a random question. Obviously, we don't have that. But for us, similar to what you all said, Slack has been
yeah.
For us.
We really leverage our AEs a lot too, because they're kind of stuck in the same world. And that's the beauty of the SDR AE partnership, was that you always kind of had a mentor that you could go to. And so we've tried to build that out in this world, but definitely we have like a late stage collab channel that has like SDRs and AEs. So if they have a question of how would you handle this objection, or if it's like industry specific to us, then they're able to ask and get other peers input too outside of just their team.
I love that, Ashley. I'm stealing that. Love it.
So I'm hoping that we have a handful of leaders that are on this too, because one thing that came up when all of us were chatting a couple of weeks ago was really how we're keeping ourselves kind of sane. and mentally strong for our team, because it can be really tough. And so I'm curious if anything has changed in the past couple of weeks, what you guys have been focusing on. But yeah, how are you staying mentally strong? And maybe Ernest, you seem to be nodding a lot, so I'm going to be over you.
Yeah, I could definitely take that. And, it's interesting because I think a lot of us kind of run in different phases right now in terms of like how all this has impacted just how we're performing in our jobs, but also just how we're feeling. I think there are kind of like three areas or three buckets. Like one, you're either doing really well because of what happened. Two, you're like either hitting or just maybe not quite there. Or three, you're just like really tanking because it had a major impact on the business. And the reality is a lot of how we judge ourselves and kind of how we stay motivated is like how our team is doing. So what I've personally started to do, and this kind of goes back to my background, being an athlete. There were times where I was playing games and it was late in the game and there was literally no way you were going to win. And try and find a way to stay motivated in that environment, because the reality is if you aren't motivated, if you're not doing your job, you will get fired. That's just kind of how it works. So what I've personally started to do is, if there are certain circumstances that I can't control, like obviously I'm doing whatever I can to stay motivated, to make sure I'm hitting my numbers and going where I want to go. But there are a lot of ancillary projects and tasks that we have as managers and leaders that are always focused on to try and improve ourselves and to make our teams a lot better, that maybe don't have a direct, immediate impact on the moment. I've used those things. Just I want to make a killer onboarding plan for my team. I know that once we start running and start testing, I want to make sure that everyone can ramp within the first 30 days or 15 days or whatever it may be. Or maybe I just want to make sure that in this given time that I want to create all these cases and sequences effectively so my team can call, email, etc. So what helps me stay motivated is if there are certain circumstances that you can't really control, things are kind of tough, being very attuned to specific things that maybe don't have a direct, immediate impact on your overall performance and measuring your success on that really helps.
We talked a lot about this, but I think like after probably, 60 days in, I kind of started having like a midlife crisis. I was like, this is not my job. Like, I am an office person. I love seeing all my reps every day. Like, I got so fueled up from their energy or hearing them on a call that like, it took me a little bit to like have to relearn my job and work with our SDR managers on our team to figure out what this new life looks like, right? And so I think it's about, it's Zoom on Zoom inception, right? I go from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom all day. And then you got to figure out how can I reach out to my reps across these different channels, right? You got to check in on them. You still have to have the emotional intelligence of being able to like, how are you doing today? And being proactive on Slack with each individual across all the meetings. It's hard. You feel like you're constantly letting people down. And so, I think it's really important to just like be in a good mind space, right? Like I literally have a block on my calendar every day at lunch that says, lay off me, I'm starving. Whoever gets that joke out there, my old SDR manager, Joe Blanco, that one's for you. Because I need time to just like get out of just like meetings and like put myself in a good spot. And that's something else that I need to like tell my managers and tell my teammates. SDRs, it is a tough gig. It is so hard to do this job by yourself. And so like, if you need to take like an hour and go like take a walk around the neighborhood or like go take your dog out or just like get your mind right, that is the stuff that is so important. And what's going to have us be successful reps and really have us really lead by example. Anything else, Malcolm, you want to add in there?
Yeah, I think all really great points. Nothing really to add, I guess, except, I've thought a lot about what we could do to be productive. I think a lot of what Ernest said makes sense. And, the same thing, Andrea, like I definitely have a battlefield commander's mindset. I want to attack problems head on. And it felt like I was running in quicksand, quite honestly, in the first few months of all of this. So, it took a lot of introspection for myself to think like, okay, I'm going to start trying things I normally would not try. And I started thinking a lot about like emotional buy-in with reps and, insightfulness and mindfulness of myself, and then like developing patience as a core competency. And like what's come out of that is like a lot of my conversations with reps now when like we can't, if getting to quota is difficult or impossible, let's say, then we can have really productive conversations around like career development, for example. And I've had a lot of great opportunities to talk to reps about what they're doing in their role now, how they can prepare themselves for their next step. And I think that has been, at least one tangible that we can work on and have some semblance of a goal around, which I've liked a lot. And then for myself, I think I acclimated really well to a remote environment because I had an extremely ridiculous commute for years. So it was actually a blessing in some ways to not have to do that. But what happened then I realized is as much as COVID didn't directly impact me, it was impacting the people around me. And that then had an impact on me. And I did notice that I was starting to change. So I started doing things that I'd never done before, like working out. I got a personal trainer. I committed to it, and I started eating better. And I got a standing desk because sitting for 18 hours a day was insane. I bought a whiteboard just because I need to whiteboard. So I made some changes, I think, to my environment. I started to try to bring elements of what being in the office was going to be, but also just like permanent changes to my own lifestyle to like really force myself to adapt to what was happening. And I think all of that has been really successful.
Yeah, and Malcolm. Yep.
Go ahead, Ernest.
Yeah, sure. So Malcolm, you said something that I obviously want to talk through a little about. Talking about us as managers, kind of how we want to motivate ourselves. You talked about the career progression. One thing I think is really helpful for all of us that are in SDR management is like fundamentally we jumped into this role because we want to help people transition career. We want to help them become salespeople. Like we care about our people so much because it's a really hard job. And like trying to find that one thing, regardless of how well your team is doing, but trying to find that one thing that one individual rep has that you really care about, like whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whatever it may be, and just like doing whatever you can to help with that. Like that helps me because as I'm sure everyone does, everyone cares what their team kind of wants to know what they're doing, how they succeed. So matching yourself onto like all the ancillary things within our teams, life, whatever it may be, to help them in any way you can. That's been a huge drive.
Yeah, I love that. You're right. And I think, Andrea, you kind of mentioned this, but like the vulnerable aspect. And I think like when we share that side of who we are as people too, it also lets them know that it's okay to have bad days. Like, I think, that's normal in sales. And then like when you think about COVID sales, it's even tougher. I noticed like last week was the first week that I like truly hit my breaking point, and I realized I like hadn't put makeup on all week. I was like getting lazy with like leaving my Zoom off, and I'm like, I have to lead by example. Like if I've got my Zoom off, they're going to have their Zoom off. And so I think like it even comes down to like the small little habits that we do each day that translate over to our teams as well. There was a question that I think Winnie has on here around SPiffs. And so her question is, have any of us set up virtual SPiffs or competitions to help motivate our team? And if you have any examples of those to share.
Yeah, we've done a few SPiffs at HackerOne. I think they've been pretty successful overall. But I guess the nuts and bolts of it, we had some contests and awards around just sort of like over-attaining on certain metrics. We had some few ideas actually for what we wanted to do for Q3, but I think the idea of just incentives, it's really interesting how you can use those as tools. And one of the things that I've done with shout out to thanks.com, THNKS, I think, it's been really valuable for me to sort of use their platform to motivate and encourage and recognize reps when they sort of go above and beyond, or even if they're having a hard time. They have like different care packages and stuff. So I've done a lot of things where like spontaneously, I'll say like, first person to get to 10 connects today, I'm going to send you a gift card, right? Stuff like that. It's just been really clean and easy to do. And I think that additional acknowledgement has gone a long way. And again, I think using that as a way to create incentives around the less glamorous aspects of the role is really powerful too, because there's sort of like an input-output, style to this that if you can incentivize the input, you're going to get a lot better of an output. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of SPiffs. I think they're great, but the one thing I would caution on is don't try to pay them more to do the job they should already be doing. I think that's one risk and pitfall you can run into with that. So happy to go into that in more detail if anybody wants, but maybe not right now.
Sure. And just to piggyback off of that, one thing that we've done, and I definitely encourage you all to do with any kind of SPiff you're running, is obviously making sure it's aligned to any kind of role. But more importantly, with the actual SPiff, sometimes we feel like we know what they would want. The reality is like it's not just money all the time, or it's not just like a day off or something like that. So just actually pulling your team, like once you find what your SPiff is going to be, what you're going to have the team marching towards, like actually pull them and say, okay, with these parameters, what would success be for you all? What would you all want to see if you won this? And you can get everyone to kind of buy into what you're going to do, and they all march towards that SPiff in that direction. Then it makes it a lot easier to run it. So it's easy to give money. And I think a lot of people are money motivated, obviously, because we're in sales. But the reality is sometimes there are different things. And I know a lot of people in the past have trips, which maybe is not, something we can do as much for now, but like trips, experiences, as you said. But trying to figure out what your team actually wants given all of this right now, because it might be a little bit different from what they would have done.
Yeah, and a lot of companies are on budgets. Like we don't have budgets to be doing monetary SPiffs right now. So one thing, we did a cold call competition last month. We've been making a lot of efforts to send less emails, be more strategic. That's a whole nother topic for another day. But we did, so the winner actually got, the winner got a LinkedIn recommendation from our CRO. So that was, you don't really get those that often these days, but in today's market, like why not stand out and separate yourself? And when you're an SDR trying to get a promotion, having your CRO like really truly recognize you in a public forum like that, I think was something that kept our people motivated.
That's an awesome idea. I love that.
You stole my thunder. So that's what we've been doing. So, in that Gong channel that I was talking a little bit about, we have our CMO Dan or our CRO Sam, and they will say like, "Oh, awesome job," or they'll like double SPiffs if they go in there. And then another component is we have like basically top performers club, right? Every single month, the top performers would go to a really nice dinner with our executive team. Well, obviously we can't do that, and so what we're doing is a lot more virtual events with our executive team. Maybe it's going to be a virtual wine tasting that the top SDRs get to attend, or maybe it's going to be like a cooking class, different things that we can do that like gives them the experience that they want to build their brand with the exec team and really feel like they're cared about from every person in this organization.
Love that. We've got another question on the chat. I'm trying to keep up with them so they don't slip through. So Morgan has a question around the type of stand-ups that we do. And if we do any sort of virtual office hours, if so, what's the frequency of them and how do they play out?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think, so for my rep stand-ups, I honestly I let them do what they want. So it runs the gamut. Sometimes they'll do it around like topical things happening in the industry. Sometimes they'll do it around like marketing events they want to get alignment on and develop messaging around together. Sometimes it's breathing exercises and yoga and mindfulness training. And I think that's totally fine. Like today we talked about, stuff we did over the weekend. We planned out a little bit of a webinar and we reinforced messaging from the QBR. Easy peasy, got it in, got it out, and then everybody's having a great productive day. So that's been great. Office hours is interesting. We've done it. I have them on my calendar, but being very candid, there's only a few types of reps who take advantage of them. And we've had discussions as a management team about what we can do differently with those, because they're sort of in a weird place where they're not really a one-on-one, they're not really a stand-up, they're optional to some extent. So then how do you really, encourage people to use them, and like how should they use them? We started thinking about where they sort of live in the scope of meetings themselves, and we sort of came to this conclusion. They're sort of like, office hours with your professor in college, where you want to sort of think about that as a group one-on-one, where you should be going with people you work on. So for example, I have two folks on my enterprise team. They're very similar people. They work a lot together. They call together and stuff. It's like you both should be coming to office hours together and like maybe doing a role play together and having me as an observer, et cetera, right? Like really thinking about how you can take advantage of the manager in that equation. So we haven't quite cracked the nut there. I do have it on my calendar still, and I'm happy for reps to take advantage of it, but hasn't quite gotten there. But I know it will be awesome when we really figure it out. But yeah, stand-ups, it's a varying agenda. I have a team meeting where we do more of the KPI stuff, but I think keeping the stand-ups very open-ended is the right play.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that. I think the organic nature of it has to be retained. Otherwise, it's just another meeting that people aren't going to prioritize or take very seriously. Still important to have your weekly stand-ups or your weekly team meetings, KPIs and goals and where you're tracking, but having like a management-led stand-up where it's a little bit fluid and organic and kind of allowing the team to decide what you're going to talk about as well is similar to that BDR, SDR team led without a manager as well, because it's important for the team to kind of talk through what they're going through, how they're feeling, things they all want to collaborate on together. But I think a lot of what people initially did when all this kind of broke out was like put 20 minutes on the calendar for every single person throughout the course of the first week because we're not going to see each other. And, people tried that. But what we started to realize, at least I think others as well, is that when you kind of force that fun, I guess, or force that meeting upon the team, it's not productive. So trying to find a way to keep this as true organic as possible, whether it's management-led or BDR-led.
Yeah, I'll say we're still doing the stand-ups with the entire org every single morning. And then we actually have team stand-ups and SDR-led sessions throughout those weeks. on the SDR team meetings, we're talking about like development and coaching. We're talking about like subject matter expertise, looking at customer stories and blogs. We're bringing guests from other departments to talk about what their role is, because even if a lot of these organizations aren't hiring, SDRs want to know where their career can go. And I think a lot of it is understanding what are the roles and what do those roles like comprise? What does a day in the life look like? And so really bringing a lot of those guests into these calls so that we can work one-on-one with each rep to talk about how we can get them and create the skill set for them to be successful in that role. But I'm going to say it's tough. There is a lot of meetings I'm in there and I'm like, Bueller, and there's a lot of these. And so it's a work in progress, right? I think that we're all trying to be the best out there, and especially with this energy, it kind of kills me when I'm like, you guys are listening. But something that's been like a really hard for me to be on Zoom, and something that I'm still working and looking for a lot of feedback to make those meetings a lot more fun every day.
I don't know, Andrea, I want you to come to my team meetings. Like, come be a guest speaker and bring the energy, because I love it. And Malcolm, I feel for you with the office hours. We started doing like a Zoom room. So far, I've been the only attendee, which is really awkward. So it's clearly not working, but I think like that's okay to try different things, figure out what your team likes. And to your point, I actually love the idea of like 2 enterprise people coming in. So I'm going to try it one more time with that type of style. Yeah. But I think, Andrea, you started talking about like the coaching side of things and like the profile of SDRs. And I'm curious, we've only got about like 4 minutes left. And I know we wanted to also talk about what like the future of SDR looks like in these remote times. And so I don't know, maybe just a couple of thoughts from each of you guys around like, does the profile change? How does recruiting look? What does onboarding look like? Like, this is kind of going to be our new world, and we got to figure out how to be leaders and build our team in this remote environment.
So recruiting has been so tough. Hey, we got a new class starting today, and it is tough. I actually started at Sendosa the week of COVID, so I was in the office for about 3 days before this all happened. So I kind of have like a soft spot for everybody that comes onboarded, because it is very hard to get to know people on Zoom. And especially if you come in as an SDR leader, it's very hard since you have to hold a lot of people accountable at the same time. But I would say, before we were more open to like greenfield or net new college grads, in the times that we're at right now, we're getting a lot more competitive against other vendors, especially we're here in Phoenix. We're seeing a lot of San Francisco-based companies starting to recruit here, or other kind of work-from-home environments. Tech stack is something that was a nice to have, or Salesforce like for outreach or sales loft experience. It is a must-have. I cannot teach anybody to use Salesforce or SalesLoft or Outreach or Lead IQ or 6 Sense, which we're crushing, Ernest. Thank you. I can't teach any of them, and so I have to have somebody that has a couple years of experience. So I'm looking at a lot of people that are account executives that maybe want to get into enterprise sales by starting as an SDR. What about Malcolm, Ernest? What about you guys?
Yeah, for me, I haven't had to do a ton of hiring during COVID. I made my last hire right before we all went remote. And I think that experience kind of was a good preparation, because, she did end up doing about, I would say 70% of her onboarding remote. And she's one of my top performers now. And I look back on what that profile was, and, she's extremely driven, right? And it's like, okay, you start thinking about, if you're going to be permanently remote, which a lot of teams are starting to do, what is the right type of person for that? Because there are people who are very good in the role, but are they good because they're surrounded by other people who are good, and then they have that energy to feed off of? Are they able to be individually successful in a isolated environment? Like, if they potentially didn't talk to another person for all day, what would that do to their psyche? And I had to start looking at people in a different lens and thinking, like, how am I going to help this person acclimate, who's normally a very social, engaging person, and now is forced into this remote environment? That then influenced how I thought what I would do for hiring potentially like next year. Hopefully I'll get some people promoted, and then we can add some headcount. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. And the other thing was, unfortunately, a lot of companies had to go through adjustments and layoffs, et cetera. So then all of a sudden there was quite a bit of talented SDRs on the market. And, the normal logic is you don't necessarily want to hire someone who's got SDR experience, because they might be looking to jump to AE really quickly. They might have bad habits you have to unteach, et cetera. But now, just to Andrea's point, it's like, well, actually, those are the best candidates. And you might actually get someone who's phenomenal and wasn't termed for any performance issues. It was just companies just not making business anymore. So that became an interesting dynamic of like, and it's one of those things every manager is going to think like, should I replace my low performers with these top people that I can just hire now if I can onboard them like essentially for free, right? So yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting discussions as a unit on my side, but haven't had to exercise on a lot of that yet. I think we'll probably look to do that in Q1 next year. And as a side note, always looking for talent, especially managers. So if anybody wants to hit me up after this, feel free.
Hey, we're hiring for an SDR manager too.
There you go. On that note. There's a lot that's going to go into that. I think the normal profile, I'll close with this, the normal profile or the stereotypical profile is probably going to be permanently adjusted. I think this idea of organization now is a non-starter. Like it's a non-negotiable. Like you need to be extremely organized to work remote. Like I can't be there to pick up the slack. You know what I mean? You have to be like
Malcolm, I call it bias for action.
Yeah, bias for action. That's it.
You have a bias for action. Your default has to be like, I'm going to make a call, or like, my manager's not over my shoulder, or like, is this email perfect? You just got to do it and execute every single day. That is who we're looking for, and everybody in this panel is looking for today, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's literally it, right? Like, you can't coach attitude. So, like, you have to hire someone who, like, at the end of the day, this person would rather, light themselves on fire than miss quota, right? Like, that's the type of candidate.
I love it. Ernest, what do you think? Any thoughts on talent and how that changes in this remote world?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. Before all this happened, we used to primarily focus on either career transitioners or like recent grads. To the point that Malcolm made earlier around essentially teaching old dog new tricks, if you want to call it that way. We tended to not like to hire the people that had the experience before because either they're trying to do it quickly or maybe they had certain habits that didn't necessarily apply to our prospecting motion. But the reality of it is, like, there are so many really, really strong candidates out there right now that, like, to no fault of their own, are just on the market because they're really on. So it'd be remiss for our team, and for all of us as leaders, to at least not take a look at them. And through that, we started to realize we've actually hired a handful the past couple of weeks, months, of people that had industry experience that maybe we wouldn't necessarily have looked at before. But because we really dug into their profile and started asking them the questions around our interview process, we realized that these are people that not only are going to do really well, but they've been obviously onboarding super quickly. The action-oriented people that Andrew was talking about as well. It's been very exciting to see that go through. But one thing that I'm also very curious about is whether or not this stay like this, because we have so many people out there. Obviously it's tough. It's a tough market for candidates because it's hard trying to find opportunity, and there are a lot of great people out there. But I'd just be curious to know whether or not it's going to be like this. Because the reality is there are so many people that we kind of just can't pick from now. Like inbounds, I'm sure a lot of you are hiring right now, are a lot stronger than what they normally are, just because the market is kind of on fire right now. There's so much out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just starting to hire too, and it's only been about a week, so still having like very initial conversations. But one of, like you mentioned, a lot of people being laid off. We did a big riff, but there was a pre-COVID decision, but COVID moved the timeline up of moving our sales team out to Salt Lake City. So now we're looking for talent in a whole different market and building that out too. And so it's really interesting what we're all going to be faced with when it comes to interviews. Like, I like to look for someone that has, like, I like to call it a whatever it takes mentality. So I think it was Andrea that said, like, someone said, like, someone on fire to not miss quota or something. And like, yeah, I think that I would like someone that would be that fearful of missing their quota. And yeah, so it's tough, and I feel for every leader out there right now, but at least we've got a really strong network, I feel like, of people like ourselves that are going through the exact same things. So hopefully we all can continue to work together in the coming months and see what each other runs into. It looks like Winnie's got one more question for us of, oh gosh, how do you identify candidates who have that mentality of needing to hit quota and the whatever it takes mentality? Winnie, if I had all those answers, I'd have all the best people on my team. But I'll let anyone else take a stab, and then I can try and answer it too.
I think usually they're going to have examples of this in their life. Like if they can't tell you a story about something like this, then they don't have the ability to do it. And I usually will ask it in the way, like, tell me a time or a situation where you had to push yourself beyond a limit, right? Like beyond what you thought was possible. And then the trick, though, is you have to dig like 3 levels deep. Like, well, they'll tell you the story, and then you ask, so, like, tell me more about that. What else about that? And then keep going until you really get to the crux of it. And if they can't really give you good answers about how they thought about it, how they felt about it, everything about it. And like, if you don't gauge like an excitement at some level of like they need that, that's probably not the right person.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's interesting because everyone that we interview at some point in their life have had some kind of adversity. So when we like to interview over here, we're focused on trying to pull that adversity out, whatever it may be. It doesn't really matter how big or small it was, but it's more of how people responded when they faced that adversity to basically determine whether or not they have that grit or that, like we call it WIT, whatever it takes mentality to get it done. So if you, to Malcolm's point, really dig into like and hear the passion they're receiving from that experience and kind of what they try to do to overcome that, you can get a sense of whether or not they have that grit and someone is going to do whatever it takes to.
And I'll just finalize it. This is a sales gig, right? Sell me. Find me on LinkedIn. Send me a personalized note. Be persistent with me. Bump me emails back to the top of my inbox, right? Treat me like a prospect, and that's going to give me an understanding of how you're going to be able to prospect the companies in your territory.
Yep, absolutely. And I'd say the last thing is I like the LinkedIn thing. How proactive are they in the SDR community? There's amazing different communities that are popping up all over. Myself and my partner Gina, we created one called SDR Ready. There are candidates in there all the time that are asking for just like 30 minutes or an hour to talk to us and want to understand what makes top performers there. Some of these people have experience, some of them don't. But I think when you find people that are proactively going out there to better themselves, they're attending conferences like this in between probably, whatever their day job is currently that they haven't become a sales professional yet. Like those are the type of people that I truly respect and want to have on my team too. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we are done. We are over time. So I'm going to wrap us up here, but amazing conversation with all of you guys. I think the questions in the chat and the engagement has been awesome. So thank you guys so much for joining. I know there's a ton of other great discussions going on throughout the day for Tenbound, so make sure you check them out. And I think I speak for all of us. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. We would love to continue the conversation elsewhere, but thank you guys so much, and keep your teams motivated and keep yourselves healthy as well.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Vivian, if you want to close us out, I'm not sure how to do that.